the cutting edge of productivity. We also have multiple formats, including the webinar format that you get to enjoy today. Now, as many of you know, we offer public webinars. It's a great, cost-effective way to be able to turbocharge your knowledge and use of applications, social media, organization, time management. You can do it from the comfort and convenience of your office anywhere in the world that you may be. So we encourage you to become a member. Join the productivity movement and take yourself to the next level of productivity. Now, today, as promised, we have our speaker, Mr. Frank, and he is actually coming to us with a wealth of experience. He brings a unique blend of both technology, leadership development, and coaching to his work with clients. He's got 12 years of experience in software consulting, UX design, business analysis, and product strategy. His involvement in technology-driven change initiatives gives him a deep sense for organizational change and organizational development. He provides leadership and agile transformation trainings in combination with team and executive coaching for corporations, medium-sized companies, and startups. So without further ado, I would like to go ahead and offer a couple of reminders, and then I'll be handing it over to him for the presentation. Just a couple of reminders that you do, if you can stand it, turn off all distractionary devices, those iPhones, Blackberries, Androids, turn off Outlook, sit back, and enjoy the presentation. Now, I'm going to go ahead and hand this hand control over here. Here we go.
All right, Kim, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Welcome.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. Let me just shift this. Perfect. And just to double check, you can see my slides?
Looks great.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for joining our webinar today. And let's jump right in. What I'll cover in the next 30 minutes, hopefully, is roughly starting with framing why we are thinking of rethinking how we develop software, and what some of the high-level key characteristics are of developing software in an agile way, and how that translates to any kind of knowledge work, really. And at the end, I made an effort to condense it down into 3 key takeaways that you can apply to your work and help you become more productive. So what is Agile? I'm assuming most of you have heard of it. It's become very popular, and even large corporations are starting to experiment with going Agile. It's primarily focused on software development, but in this age of very rapid economic change, it is becoming more and more of a necessity for management in general. And underlying is a state of mind that translates into all sorts of areas of our work, and what colleagues and I half-jokingly refer to as a spiritual practice. It's very aspirational, and it's very hard to do. Underlying it is really a new approach to thinking about problem solving. And to set that in perspective for us, I'm going to be referring to Dave Snowden's work with the Kinevin framework. And if you get the slides from SlideShare, or you have already a PDF in front of you, there's some references at the end of the presentation. So David Snowden, the 2 kinds of problems we'll concentrate on today are, first, the complicated problems. There's a right and wrong answer to these problems, and all it requires is the necessary expertise, and people with a shared expertise will reasonably agree upon what is the right or wrong solution. It's the classic engineering problem or the physics problem that we know from school. We analyze, we gather data, we think about the solution, we design it, we create a plan, and then we go do it. For a kindergartner, it would require some necessary expertise to know about mathematical notations, and we have a complicated problem. Here's another version of the complicated problem at the different end of the scale. It's way beyond my pay grade, but I'm assuming these formulas describe a problem where we can arrive at a right or wrong answer in the end, and it helps us determine and make predictions about the future. The second set of problems that we're looking at are problems where the solution is unknowable. There isn't a really clear relationship between the cause and effects of things. Usually we have a system of influences that contribute to the situation, and making a change in one area has a ripple effect throughout the entire situation, and it's very difficult to predict what's actually going to happen. As an example, like every social system, every time a group of people gets together, we're dealing with complex problems. Think about organizing a children's party. We do a lot of preparation and a lot of planning for what's going to make for a fun afternoon. And by the time we have 15 kids in the backyard, we quickly move to improvising. Are they like enjoying playing ball? Do we need to have some rules around the swing set? All those things happen and emerge out of the moment. So when we start thinking about software development, not so much as an engineering problem, but as a social activity, as something people do together, then we're starting to enter an arena of complex problems. We can also go really big scale and think about the economy. Like, who knew that a change in banking regulations 10 years ago would lead to a financial disaster? Or right now we're entering an era of healthcare reform, and we have lots of predictions about the future that are from all over the place, and it's very difficult to predict what our healthcare system will look like 1 year from now, 5 years from now, or even further out. In the domain of complex problems, we really need to rely on experimentation. We want to create small little experiments that are safe to fail, instead of looking for safe fail solutions. And every time we start an experiment, we want to think about a strategy that helps us amplify the results and the effect that we enjoy and like, and come up with recovery strategies that help us dampen unintended consequences in the things that aren't so useful. In the domain of complex problems, it's not that useful to analyze and gather lots and lots of information ahead of time. We want to know enough, depending on the situation, and then quickly move into a stage of experimenting. We try something, we see what the effect is, and then we adapt our strategy. Essentially, we want to plan for change. We want to expect the unexpected, and then deal with it when we encounter it. It will happen, we just don't know when and how. Let's translate that into the world of software. When we think of it as a social activity, then coming to high productivity requires lots of experimentation and a way of adapting to change. Here are some key aspects that software engineers have figured out is useful in this context. First, we want to plan with uncertainty in mind. I think there's a really strong cultural bias to want to be in control, to want to know, to have certainty, and so we end up creating big Gantt charts and Microsoft project galore. I've been to clients where, they've plastered an entire wall of dependencies and work streams that were near impossible to keep up to date and to actually relate to what is happening in reality. So by contrast, in Agile software, we actually plan at the level of ambiguity that is present. Here you can see a team developing a product roadmap out many months with some parallel work streams that have dependencies and the people need to know what other people are working on. And it happens essentially on sticky notes. We have titles, they're placeholders for features or feature sets. And we can easily move them around through conversation. And in this room, during the day, this was about a 4 or 5 hour activity where people wandered in and out and contributed in their area of expertise and what they knew most about, and had some conversations about what they were seeing happening in other areas, and quickly kind of mapping out in a very rough sense how they envisioned the future. And at the end of the exercise, you could bring in an executive, and they would look at the wall and join into that shared understanding, and at the same time have a pretty good sense for the level of ambiguity that is actually there. So we're trying very hard to avoid any false sense of precision. This is going to take 8 hours. No, we really don't know. But if we t-shirt size it, this is going to be small, this is kind of medium amount of work, and this is big work. And this is kind of how it will flow. And then we get really precise in small baby steps. Usually software teams commit to a certain amount of functionality that they can accomplish in 2 weeks. And within those 2 weeks, we don't tinker with the functionality. We just stay focused on what we've committed to, and we build it. And it turns out that our brain is pretty good at projecting out what can happen within 2 weeks. Then we start with the work that is most valuable, either from a customer perspective or from building a foundation for the future work. And we do a little bit of planning 1 or 2 iterations forward. But our focus is on just accomplishing what's happening in the next 2 weeks. And up to then, we keep track of defining the next chunk of work in a very high-level way. We call them user stories. And we avoid, as much as we possibly can, any kind of documentation. We learn so much better in conversation and being able to ask questions and drill further than when someone sits down quietly in the cubicle and writes a big document. Nobody reads it, and by the time we need it, it's probably somewhat out of date. The slide isn't full. Oh, here we go. In Agile software, we also put a premium on learning. Everything we do, we optimize about learning as much as possible, as early as possible. One of the ceremonies, and this is a little bit of lingo, is what we call retrospectives. After every 2 weeks, we demonstrate, we show other people what we've accomplished, and then we sit down for an hour and think about how we did the work. What worked well? Where did we run into problems? And then have a conversation about what do we want to try differently in the next 2 weeks. And it turns out, if you're only committing to an experiment for 2 weeks, most people are very agreeable to do even somewhat wacky things. We just try it out and see what effect it has. So a big part of it is making visible what actually happened, and then doing some problem solving around those observations. And in this whole process, we're looking for a really deep commitment to continuous improvement. It turns out, if you want to become a high-performing team, all you really need to commit to is to continuously get better. And no matter where you start, you will eventually become a high-performing team. Within those 2 weeks, we want to get to working software. We don't want to keep track of activities and milestones and, I worked some on this feature over there. No, we really want to commit to having working results. And that means we test our software, we integrate them with other pieces of software around it, or we deploy it to a server where it can actually work. And instead, like traditionally, you could easily have a 6-month, like developers would go away and program like crazy for 6 months and then drop a big piece of software off in the test group. And the testers would start working on it and finding bugs, and then the chaos ensues. And in this handoff, usually, there's a lot of learning that gets lost. If we do the testing and the integrating and the deploying every 2 weeks, we start learning what usually shows up at the end of the project. And so it's much more predictable how quickly we can make progress. And it creates constant feedback for how is it working, how are we doing. And it turns out that in the traditional approach, it was first the developers and then the testers, and then we got into operation. It turns out if you turn that around and you actually have the tester sit down with the developer first and actually identify how do we know that the software is working in the end? What kind of tests are we going to use to validate that it's working? When we go through that thought process before we start writing code, we end up with much better quality in the code. At the heart of Agile is our self-organizing teams. We want the people who are doing the work be able to pick and choose how they're going to do it and who's going to work on it. And that's all happening within the team. For that to work well, we need stable teams. Today, managers are very used to moving people from one project to the next depending on where the current firefighting happens. And it creates a lot of churn and people getting used to each other in the work. So when we actually commit to having stable teams, they will figure out over time how they're going to best work together. And it's not so much that we have 3 testers on the team and you know, 2 database developers. No, it's Bill and Jill and Susan and Kevin, and they figure out how they work best. And when we want to get to working software and end results, we need a cross-functional team working together. So every skill set and every expertise we need to get to the end result, they have shared responsibility and accountabilities about getting to the end result. It's not one developer being the star and then, you know, as often happens, the testers get the blame that the schedule doesn't work. This is one of the bigger challenges that we face all the time, and that is creating a shared space for the team. Not surprisingly, it is much more effective to have people sit in the same room and share information as they go. Oftentimes in these shared team rooms, for example, you have a whiteboard that maps out the current architecture. And maybe 2 people have a conversation in front of the whiteboard about having to adapt the architecture because of this new feature that requires a different structure. And someone across the room can sort of informally witness the conversation that is going on. And suddenly they realize, oh, this affects me too, and they can quickly join in. Or they're just keeping track in sort of peripheral vision that, okay, something's changing over there, but I don't really need to bother. So this informality and what we call big information radiators, we don't need to push it out in email, we don't need to have meetings around it. It happens informally and all the time. Of course, today, in today's reality, that is a tall order for most organizations. Yeah, we have teams in India and China and probably Eastern Europe, and they work together with several people spread out across campuses here in the States. And so how there's sort of a big effort at the moment how we can create that virtually, and a lot of experimentation happening around that. But nothing beats being in the same physical space. So let's shift to Agile as a spiritual practice. What is the mindset behind it that we're after that translates well into all other areas of knowledge work? The first one is being comfortable with not knowing and behaving accordingly. So when we start planning and we have this big wall of our product roadmap, being able to sit with the discomfort and anxiety about, oh, are we going to make this deadline or that conference, or how much of our functionality will we have ready? And the truth is, we just don't know for sure. And as we get closer, our cone of uncertainty gets smaller, and we can say with more confidence, oh, we're going to have this much by then. But there's a lot of holding still and discomfort. This is a big one that is very difficult to do at work. We have a hard time doing it in our private lives, and at work where our reputation and our bonuses depend on it, the willingness to be wrong is really hard. And it's the keystone for any kind of learning, and particularly if we start relying more on experiments, to actually look for ways that we can question our assumptions and be willing to be wrong. You can tell why this is aspirational and more of a practice than a mindset. Underlying the idea of willing to be wrong is being really willing to be transparent, making things visible, which makes us very vulnerable. Vulnerable to criticism, vulnerable to judgment, and in the context of Agile, we are looking for ways of changing how bonuses get distributed, who evaluates whose performance. The old models go counter to this call for openness and building some trust that when I show my imperfections, that others will handle it with care and give me some slack around it. And with any kind of learning, we want to start having a light touch on our sense of what is real. What do we know, and how do we actually come to that conclusion? What are the assumptions behind it? And what kind of experiments or trial runs will help us either validate or question those assumptions? All right, that brings us to the takeaways. The first one that I want to highlight is around experimenting with how we can collaborate more radically. We're very used to wanting to optimize resources, so individuals take on small tasks, disappear in their cubicles, and everybody is really busy. However, busy and producing results are not the same thing. The level of creativity that we bring to a situation when we collaborate actually helps us make progress much faster than when we are too focused on just optimizing that everybody is busy all the time. Yeah, the added level of diversity and difference in perspectives and different backgrounds helps us to get better results faster. We want to change the way we think about planning. And we want to get really clear about what we want to accomplish, the job that the software is doing, what our customers need, and how we think we can fulfill those needs. Get really clear about what we're doing, and then have a very light approach on how we're going to get there. Because the how is going to change as we're moving along, as we're learning more. We'll find shortcuts. We'll discover that certain features actually nobody's looking for, so we don't even build them. Or we learn that there are features that are really important to people as we get into conversations or showing them prototypes and betas, and we learn that there are other features that are really, really important to them that we didn't even think of. So how can we map out this process to optimize for learning and be willing to change our plans with the end in mind? And that gets us to the last one, and that is about optimizing for momentum. Making progress, starting to do work early. Yeah, what's the first experiments? What's the first prototype? How can we get going so that we can create that feedback loop and create the learning? Good enough for now. Moving forward in small steps and rigorously prioritize where we're putting our attention and how we can create the highest value for either the business or our customers. The biggest antidote to that is perfection. If there is no right or wrong answer, shooting for the perfect answer is misguided. Let's get it to good enough for now and get moving. All right, and on that note, a friend of mine and I, we've written a 25-page PDF ebook that I'm very happy to share with you. If you want to email me, I will send you a link where you can download it. And if you want to, in that email, indicate if you are interested in receiving information about other things we're up to, like our Agile Improvisation Workshop, where we're experimenting with how improvisation informs the way we actually approach our work and we interact and foster collaboration. We also have a workshop coming up about Agile governance that thinks about how we organize businesses and how we get out of that hierarchical thinking to help us become more agile as an organization. All right. I'm a little bit early. That gives us more time for questions. That's probably good.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. I'm just sitting here fascinated. You brought up so many great points, and I'm imagining that our other listeners have some questions brewing as well. So I'm going to go ahead and take back the control for just a moment. If you have questions, if you have comments, please go ahead and start typing those into the question box, and we'll get to those in just one moment. So as part of this process of becoming more agile, we're going to encourage you to join the Accomplishing More with Less community. There is the Less is More blog on the People-on-the-Go website at www.people-onthego.com. There's also the Accomplishing More with Less group on Facebook and LinkedIn. You can follow Pierre Khawand on Twitter. Want to highlight the leadership survey and drawing that is going on right now. The survey is still open. You can go to surveymonkey.com/s/leadership-today. I'm sure that link is on the website as well. Now, upcoming workshops that are tangential to today's topic include project management, Microsoft Project, the Accomplishing More with Less series, which is a personal favorite of mine because you get to take a look at the results that are most important to you. And there's even a tool in the Accomplishing More with Less series that focuses on the things you need to accomplish in 2 weeks that I was tying in with our presentation today, and more. So you can find the dates, details, and times at www.people-onthego.com. That ends our commercial break, and you are on the air. So let me go ahead and take a look at the questions that have come on, and then you can let me know if you'd like control of the presentation again, if there's anything that you want to show, or if you want to leave it as it is, whichever you'd prefer. Now, I see that we've got a number of questions coming in here. Thank you so much. I enjoyed the presentation. What examples, here's our first question, what examples do you have of using Agile methodology in areas outside of IT? Like to speak to that?
That's a great question. I have worked a fair amount with management teams and business owners and their key employees in creating space for strategic initiatives. Generally, we get so caught up in just managing and keeping up with the day-to-day demands that sort of the longer-term strategic projects fall by the wayside. And it could be as simple as, updating the website, creating a blog every week, making follow-up calls, or it doesn't have to be, highfalutin. It's just getting to the longer-term projects is really hard. So we've used this idea of taking 2-week increments and identifying, let's go with the example of updating a website, identifying this as a project and the next step that is reasonable and doable within the next 2 weeks. And they understand what client work or what other demands on their time they have, and they commit and get really clear about the next baby step. I'm going to change the text. I'm going to look for a different picture. We're adding a new page. That's doable within 2 weeks, and we keep track of that and focus our attention on just the next 2 weeks. And I've done the same thing with like a nonprofit board where you had 8 volunteers donating their time, and there too it was really important to get clear about, in the next 2 weeks we want to make some progress in this area and that area, and what's the next little baby step. And it's fascinating and kind of surprising to people to find out how much more traction and momentum they can build.
Yeah, absolutely. What comes to mind to me too is we encourage people to actually block out time on their calendar for those projects that are most important to them. It's these unconventional ideas that can really help people to get those results and move those projects and those tasks forward.
Yes, and when you actually have sort of your next step identified, you have a good idea. If I just block out an hour on Friday, I'll be in okay shape.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes. So I'm seeing a few different questions that are coming in kind of along a similar theme. So we have some folks who are asking for you to say more about connecting virtually and asking if you're saying it's important for people to be in the same physical space to spark creative collaboration. How do we work with virtual environments?
Wow, that is a big topic. And the short answer is we're still experimenting. And because the tools that are available virtually are changing so fast, now we have Google Hangouts, group Skypes, corporations are building their own internal like Twitter feeds and more social ways of, instead of putting everything into email, I can make announcement on the team feed, and people, when they have time, can keep track of it and comment. And so the reality is it's changing very quickly with the tools that we're having. The idea of social, what we're experiencing with social media as a way of spreading information informally within teams, there's a lot of experimentation that happens around that. Google Documents has made it very easy to actually collaborate in the same document, brainstorming, writing text, doing spreadsheets together at the same time, even though we're spread out halfway around the world. One of the biggest challenges is really the time shift. How do you work with a team in India that sleeps while we're working and the other way around? Now, sometimes that actually creates opportunities where I know of a company, they actually got really good at having a development team here in Silicon Valley that works for 10 hours for part of the day, and then they leave work and the team in India was able to pick up and continue writing on the same code base, but overnight while we're sleeping. That is very hard to do. It requires a lot of both kind of figuring out. In this team, for example, they had their wall charts where they were keeping track of the work that is in progress, and at the end of the day, somebody took a digital photo, put it up on the server, and the first person in India that arrived picked up the photo and adjusted their physical wall board to look like the one in Silicon Valley, and then they were working it during their workday, and then did the same thing when they went to home. So
fantastic.
Creating virtual spaces, shared virtual spaces, is key for virtual collaboration, and there are lots of tools for that.
So I've got a couple other questions that are here, and one is, where can you learn the Agile methodology in a systemic way?
Wow. Great question.
And let me just tell you the other so you can
Noodle a
prioritize
bit.
here. Exactly. Please review probable shared values when we consider Agile and spirituality. No small questions here.
No small questions. So the idea of, or the parallel I was drawing to the spiritual practice is less in the physical realm, in the metaphysical realm, as more in sort of the me working, like in meditation. The idea is, yeah, you're never perfect in meditation. It's a continuous practice. And similarly, when I think about my willingness to be wrong, or my willingness to question my assumptions and make them transparent and be vulnerable, those things are highly aspirational. It's not like, yeah, we do it for a while and then we're done. It continues. It's layers of the onion, and we can, you know, in collaboration with teams, we start to more and more prioritize what is the quality of connection to my other team members, how much trust do I have with them, what kind of conflicts do I need to work through so that the trust can grow, and be rigorous and kind of daring about it. What other questions do we have?
We had the where can you learn the Agile
methodology. Did that sound like it answered it, Kim?
See if there's any follow-up question to that.
Sorry, I just talked over you. So what was the question?
The question was, where can you learn the Agile methodology in a systemic way? And I'm going to add a piece to that answers another question as well. For everyone to know that, in fact, People on the Go will be emailing you, and the recording to this session will be posted in our Accomplishing More with Less groups on LinkedIn and Facebook. So I had a participant who asked where it would be and if they can share it. And absolutely, please feel free to share this information with your staff and with others. So that's how you can find that information, as well as the ebook that he had offered, which might be another resource for learning this methodology and continuing things forward. I think we are just about at time here, so I want to thank you so much for this fascinating talk and presenting it in such a manageable way for those of us to get on board and start to think more openly and more deeply about these processes. Is there anything in closing that you would like to share with us?
This was a lot of fun. Great questions. I hope it was useful, and an open invitation. If you have any kind of feedback about what worked, what didn't work, and what I might try differently next time, please use my email address, folke@outformations.com, and drop me a note. I highly appreciate it.
For that continuous improvement.
Yes, because it's eating our own dog food. And it does not have to be great. I mean, don't worry about making me uncomfortable. I'm working on it.
Excellent. Well, we are asking folks, when you close out of this Lunch and Learn webinar, your feedback is greatly appreciated. So you're also welcome to put feedback in there. But again, I just want to thank you. I was fascinated, and you've got my mind going in multiple directions with ideas and curiosities and questions, and I personally just love to learn new things and expand. So I'm very grateful for this time, and I will look forward to hearing and seeing more. For the rest of you, we hope to see you again at our Lunch and Learn sessions and on the People on the Go sessions. Please let us know if you have comments or questions, and you will get an email with a link to the recorded version of this session as well. This is Kim Silverman with People on the Go, signing off. Thank you very much, and have an agile day. Take care.
Thank you.